Your former chief of staff testified under oath about a conversation which Karl Rove told you about complaints of former New Mexico U.S. Attorney David Iglesias and two other U.S. attorneys for not being aggressive enough against so-called voter fraud. When did such a conversation between you and Karl Rove take place?
What I recall, Senator, is that there was a conversation where Mr. Rove mentioned to me concerns that he had heard about pursuing voter fraud or election fraud in 3 jurisdictions: New Mexico, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as I recall.
How many, going back to New Mexico, how many conversations about New Mexico with Mr. Rove?
Senator, I can only recall of that one conversation.
Do you recall when that was?
Senator, my recollection was it was in the fall of 2006.
Do you remember where?
No, sir, I don't remember where that conversation took place. And Senator, I don't recall either whether or not it was a phone conversation or was an in-person conversation. But I do have a recollection of that conversation.
So when was David Iglesias added to the list of U.S. attorneys to be replaced?
Of course, Senator, when I accepted the recommendation, I did not know when Mr. Iglesias was in fact added to the recommended list. As I've gone back and reviewed the record, it appears that Mr. Iglesias was added sometime between, I believe, October 17th and December 15th. But I was not responsible for compiling that.
Was added either before or after the elections, but you don't know when. Is that what you're saying?
Senator, I just responded as to when I believe. As I've gone back and looked at the documents, it appears he was added sometime between October 17th and November 15th.
I understand, but you don't know when.
Senator, I have no recollection of knowing when that occurred.
Do you know why he was added?
Again, Senator, I was not responsible for compiling that information. The recommendation was made to me. I was not surprised that Mr. Iglesias was recommended to me because I had heard about concerns about the performance of Mr. Iglesias. Certainly, I'd heard concerns from Senator Domenici.
And who else?
Well, Senator, certainly,
and Karl
what I know, I heard concerns raised by Mr. Rove, and what I know today, what I don't recall the specific mention of this conversation, I recall the meeting, is that there was a meeting in October with the president, in which the president, as I understand it, relayed to me similar concerns about pursuing election fraud.
When was that?
In 3 jurisdictions. Senator, I've gone back and looked at my schedule, and it appears that that meeting occurred on October 11th.
Now, Mr. Iglesias has been described by your former chief of staff as a diverse up-and-comer. He was reportedly offered the job as the head of the executive office of the United States Attorneys for you here in Washington. He was selected by the Department of Justice to instruct other U.S. attorneys on investigating and prosecuting voter fraud. This past weekend, the Albuquerque Journal reported that when Senator Domenici told, this is a quote, when Senator Domenici told Gonzalez he wanted Iglesias out in the spring of 2006, you refused, I'm quoting now from the article, and told Senator Domenici you would fire Iglesias only on orders from the president. In your testimony you provided, you characterized Mr. Iglesias as a fine lawyer, dedicated professional, gave many years of service to the department. But in your March 7 column in U.S. Today, you wrote that he was asked to leave because he simply lost your confidence. When and why did he lose your confidence?
Senator, Mr. Iglesias, like these other United States attorneys, I recognize their service. I recognize their courage to serve the American people. Mr. Iglesias lost the confidence of Senator Domenici, as I recall, in the fall of 2005 when he called me and said something to the effect that Mr. Iglesias was in over his head, and that he was concerned that Mr. Iglesias did not have the appropriate personnel focused on cases like public corruption cases mention specific cases. He simply said public corruption cases. I don't recall Senator Domenici ever requesting that Mr. Iglesias be removed. He simply complained about whether or not Mr. Iglesias was capable of continuing that position.
With all due respect, Mr. Attorney General, my question wasn't when he may have lost the confidence of Senator Domenici. My question is, when and why did he lose your confidence?
Senator, what I instructed Mr. Sampson to do was consult with people in the department.
When and why did he lose your confidence?
Based upon the recommendation, what I understood to be the consensus recommendation of the senior leadership in the department, that in fact there were issues and concerns about the performance of these individuals. And that's when I made the decision to accept the recommendation, and in fact it would be appropriate to make a change in this particular district. Now, the fact that Mr. Iglesias appeared on the list again was not surprising to me, because I'd already had heard concerns about Mr. Iglesias' performance.
In a March 21 op-ed in the New York Times, Mr. Iglesias addressed the reasons he believes he was fired. And let me just quote from it. And these are his words. As this story has unfolded these last few weeks, much has been made of my decision to not prosecute alleged voter fraud in New Mexico. Without the benefit of reviewing evidence gleaned from FBI investigative reports, party officials in my state have said I should have begun a prosecution. What the critics who don't have any experience as prosecutors have asserted is reprehensible, namely that I should have proceeded without having proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The public has a right to believe that prosecution decisions are made on legal, not political grounds. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
Justice Department officials, including your principal associate deputy, Mr. Michelle, have said that one of the reasons Mr. Iglesias was replaced because, in their words, he was an absentee landlord. But I understand he continues his service as an officer in the Naval Reserve, and that fulfilling his Naval Reserve responsibilities to take him out of the office approximately 40 days a year. You are aware, I assume, that the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act and other laws prohibit employers from denying an individual employment benefits because of their military service?
I am aware of that. I support it strongly, and we enforce that act.
When, how, and by whom did this absentee landlord rationale for replacing Mr. Iglesias arise?
Senator, that rationale was not in my mind, as I recall, when I accepted the recommendation. We have, of course, several other United States attorneys who have performed military service. I applaud it and I support it. It would not be a reason that I would ask a United States attorney to leave.
Let me ask you about absentee landlords. You have a Mr. Mercer who's currently serving as your acting Associate Attorney General, even though he's U.S. Attorney in Montana. The Chief Judge out there has been very, very critical of the way that office is run, the fact that he's gone. How many days a year does Mr. Mercer stay here serving as your acting Associate Attorney General rather than the job he was confirmed for?
Senator, that's a question, an answer that I have to get back to you. But I think every United States attorney.
Well, do you have any general idea? I mean, is it like a week a year? Is it several months a year?
Senator, let me get back with you with the most accurate information.
He's your Associate Attorney General. I mean, you would certainly know whether it was a week a year or several months a year, wouldn't you?
Senator, I'd like to give you that information, but the main point I want the American people to understand is that every case is different with respect to serving in dual hat capacities. Well, I've heard no one complain about the fact that Pat Fitzgerald was prosecuting.
I'm not talking about Mr. Fitzgerald.
While he was still serving as United States Attorney. Because every
I'm
case
talking
is
about an office that the judge himself says is in disarray in Montana, and Mr. Mercer has testified that he's in Montana just 3 days a month. 3 days a month while he's acting as your Associate Attorney General. I just mentioned that because if we're talking about absentee landlords, sometimes the absentee landlords are created by your own office.
Can I respond to that?
Certainly, and then it's Mr. Spector's time.
In my travels, talking to the United States attorneys, I raised this issue, whether or not dual hatting continues to be a good idea, to a person. I don't recall any dissent. They all thought it was good. It was good for the U.S. attorney to get transparency into the Department of Justice. They also believed it was important for them to be able to call someone they knew working in the Department of Justice. Every case is different. It may depend upon how strong the first assistant is. It may depend upon the strength of the other chiefs in that office. So every case is going to be different, Senator. And so the fact that someone can do it, like Mr. Fitzgerald, depends on a lot of different circumstances.
In my state, I'd be pretty upset if the U.S. Attorney is there only 3 days a month. Senator Specter.
And Senator, your views would be very important. I'd be interested to know what those views are.